Welcome back to Precalculus. Today we're going to take a look at negative numbers, and we're going to answer two main questions. What happens when we add negative numbers? And what happens when we multiply negative numbers? In addition, because we can add and multiply, we're also going to find that we can subtract and divide. So, let's jump straight into it. Adding. What do we do about negative numbers? More importantly, why is this first question 10 minus 3 in the addition section? Well, that is because when we subtract, really what we do is we add negative numbers. So 10 minus 3 is the same thing as 10 plus negative 3, which we know is 7. So, when we have this question, like, what is negative 5 plus 6? Well, in the last video we learned about the commutative property and how you can't switch the order around. But because we found out that every subtraction problem here is really just an addition problem, that we can say, okay, well, what if we say 6 plus negative 5? And we know that 6 plus negative 5 is just the same thing as 6 minus 5. So this is going to be 1. We can also just start at negative 5 and add 6 to it and get 1. But I think it's good to introduce this concept by showing how the other properties worked in the previous video. So, negative 5 plus 6 is just the same thing as 6 minus 5. 10 minus 3 is really just the same thing as saying 10 plus negative 3. So what about this next example? Negative 3 plus negative 6. Well, if we take negative 3 and we add negative 6, this is really the same thing as saying, okay, here's negative 3, and let's subtract 6 from that. And then we're going to get negative 9. Another way we could look at it is say, okay, well, it's an addition problem, so we can switch the order of these around. And we can say, okay, this is the same thing as negative 6 plus negative 3, which we know is the same thing as negative 6 minus 3. And this is going to be negative 9. So when you add negative numbers, you're really just subtracting. Now what about when you multiply numbers? Well, there's a few rules we need to go over with multiplication, and these are going to be your lifesavers. When we have a negative times a negative, we're going to get a positive number. When we get a negative times a positive, we're going to get a negative number. And when we get a positive times a positive, we're going to get a positive number. So, in the first example here, we have negative 1 times 6. Well, what is 1 times 6? 1 times 6 is 6. And how many negatives do we have? Well, this is a negative times a positive, so the end result's going to be negative. What about negative 5? Well, this is a negative times a negative. So we get a positive. So we're going to get 5. So negative 5 is just 5. So when we think about the number here, we put it on a little number line or whatever. And we have a 5 here. When we take a negative, really what we're doing is we're just sending it to the exact spot in the other side. Then when we get a negative on this, we just send it back to the same spot on the other side. So, what's negative 3 times 2? Well, negative 3 times 2 is a negative times a positive, so we're going to have a negative here. And 3 times 2 is 6. Okay, how could we rewrite negative 3 times 2? Well, negative 3 times 2 is actually the same thing as 3 times negative 2. Because a negative times a positive is the same thing as a positive times a negative. We could also rewrite this as negative 3 times 2, because all of these results are going to give us negative 6. Okay, what about negative 6 times negative 7? Well, we have two negatives, so we're going to get a positive, and 6 times 7 is just 42. So those are all the different conditions we can have here. So that's multiplying negative numbers. So here's a little bit more of an abstract example. So here we have some variables, and it's good to work in variables because we get to kind of see the meat of what exactly is going on here. So what's negative x plus 3y? Okay, well, what we're going to do is we're going to think of this negative as a negative 1. And then we're just going to use our distributive property here. So this is going to be the same thing as what's negative 1 times x, and then we're going to add negative 1 times 3y. So negative 1 times x is just going to be negative x, because it's a negative times a positive. And then we're going to add what's negative 1 times 3y. That's a negative times a positive. So we're going to get negative 3y. So here we have negative x plus negative 3y, which I showed before. When we add a negative number, we're really just subtracting. So this is going to be negative x minus 3y. In fact, in general, when you have negative a plus b in brackets, you're going to get minus a minus b. So those are the same thing. Okay, what about if we have negative 2x minus y? Well, in this example, we're going to distribute the negative to the 2x. We're going to distribute the negative to the minus y. So what's negative times 2x? Well, that's going to be negative 2x. Now, what's negative 1 times negative y? Well, it's a negative times a negative, so we're going to get a positive y. So this will be negative 2x plus y, which we can write as y minus 2x. So in general, when we get negative a minus b, this is just the same thing as b minus a. So here we add negative 2x minus y, and then we got y minus 2x. So it's a little bit more abstract, but we see the distributive property here, and then we see the commutative property after. Kind of cool to see that the things we learned in the previous video actually show up and are relevant. Crazy, right? Math being relevant? Whoever thought of that? Anyways, now that you've seen a few examples, I think it's time that you try your own, and maybe you'll fail miserably. Maybe you'll do surprisingly well. We'll see. So take a moment to do these, and then come back and I'll give you the solution. Okay, hopefully you had time there. In the first question, we take this negative 8, we distribute it to the a, and then we distribute it to the negative b. So this is the same thing as saying negative 8 times a, and then we're going to add negative 8 times negative b. So this is just negative 8a plus, what's negative 8 times negative b? That's just 8b. So that's going to be 8b minus 8a. So here is our solution. Negative 8 times a minus b is just 8b times negative 8a. Question number 2. This is meant to be an exercise of how far can you extend your knowledge of negative multiplication. So here's what we do. We're going to count our negative signs here. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 negative signs. So what's our final result going to be? Well, every 2 negatives makes a positive. So we only have 5 negatives. So we have an odd number of negatives, therefore our final solution is going to be negative. So if you have an odd number of negatives, you get a negative solution. If you have an even number of negatives, then you get a positive solution. Then the rest of it is just multiplying out the numbers here. So we have x times 2 times 2 times 3 times 4 times 2 times 3. So we know it's going to be x of some sort. Now we just have to multiply our numbers together. So 2 times 2 is 4, times 3 is 12, times 4 is 48, times 2 is 96, times 3 is 288. I believe 96 times 3 is 288. That's just 300 minus 12. Yeah, that's 288. Okay, so our solution here is negative 288x. So this one again, I like to throw in these annoying questions just to see if you're really did understand the concept. So if you don't understand why I got there, or if you need more examples or have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments below. If you're good, feel free to share it with your friends, because hopefully they might get some help out of this. So have a great day, and I hope to see you guys next time.